I don't know. I'd like to assume that nobody would throw fights.
Be a
So
scumbag.
if you put people on the same
Be a
side of the
scumbag.
bracket,
Say be a scumbag.
yeah, people
Say,
wouldn't be scumbags to
thank
throw
you.
fights.
There you go.
I'm Justin Lesko, a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu brown belt and former pro MMA fighter.
And I'm Mike Callahan, a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu brown belt and a law enforcement officer. So Robert Drysdale is a legend. He's also the second American to win a black belt world championship.
He is also someone who has long been surrounded by controversy. He had failed drug tests, questionable cornering, and now the allegations that his match with Andre Galvao at ADCC was fixed, those allegations are essentially confirmed.
Fixing fights and fixing matches is like a mortal sin. And in hindsight, if you take a look at the match between Drysdale and Galvao, it's pretty obvious that this one was fixed.
The only fixing anyone should be doing in jiu-jitsu is fixing their wardrobe by upgrading to Epic Roll.
Somebody should fix your brain, because that was a terrible segue. But Justin's right. Epic Roll BJJ is by far the best there is out there.
As a grappler, you need apparel that was designed by grapplers specifically for you, and that's exactly what Epic Roll is.
T-shirts, shorts, rash guards, skis, sweatshirts, sweatpants, mugs, artwork. It's like an endless list. Check them out at Epic Roll BJJ or visit them at epicrollbjj.com. And when you get to checkout, don't forget to use the coupon code podcast15 for 15% off of all your orders.
Epic Roll will help you look your best both on and off the mats. And like Mike said, use the code podcast15 to get 15% off at epicrollbjj.com. And make sure to give them a follow on Instagram at epicrollbjj.
Now let's take a closer look at Robert Drysdale and all the controversy that surrounded him. Welcome to That Jiu-Jitsu Podcast. We had an episode planned, and I still think that we end up doing it about the Nate Diaz thing, but this kind of just took over within the past day or so, this whole Drysdale thing. Robert Drysdale is an Brazilian American jiu-jitsu practitioner. He grew up in Brazil, but he's I think one of his parents is American, the other one is Brazilian. And in the early 2000s, he was a part of Team Brasa, which was like the powerhouse back then. And also a member of that team before he started Atos was Galvao, Andre Galvao. So Drysdale places third at the 2007 ADCC championships that were held in Trenton, New Jersey. And they never came back because even the ADCC organizers know that you should stay out of New Jersey. So they made that mistake once. And anyway. So
the Trenton Makes Bridge wasn't enough to bring them back for a repeat time to Trenton. It's a pretty nice bridge.
Yeah, so it was in Trenton. They came back, and then they decided that they don't even want to come back to the fucking East Coast again, probably because of what happened in New Jersey. So Drysdale takes third in his weight class, which I think was under 99 kilos. And
I'll take your word for it. You're better with the number.
Yeah,
memory
so
than
that was.
I'll take your word for it.
I think he lost to Zanji in the semis of his weight. And then he went on to win the absolute that year. And in the finals, he beat Marcelo Garcia. So that's just put that in the back of your mind. That is in 2007. Drysdale wins the absolute. He takes third in his weight class. I don't want to say that because he wins a black belt world title in the gi.
Right.
He also wins a black belt world title in the gi.
My man's accomplished.
He is accomplished. So, and I think he won the black belt world title in the gi before ADCC, regardless. So he's got an ADCC championship, an open weight championship, and he's got the black belt world title. So then he kind of drifts away from the competition scene, and he's teaching and he's opening his academy and he's got affiliates and everything. But the controversy that started surrounding him was that he was a commentator, so he had like biased commentary, and he wasn't too keen on these up and comers, and especially the guys from John Danaher's team. So just again, put that in the back of your mind. So he commentates and he's got beef that's been documented with Gordon Ryan and Gary Tonin and the Danaher guys. So back in April, he publishes a book. It was like the opening of the Closed Guard or something like that.
And it was supposed to have a movie that went along with it too, right? And it was like the much anticipated documentary about jiu-jitsu that never came.
Never happened. Right. So he has this book, and as part of, his marketing for this book, he's doing interviews and he's doing like shoots on, certain topics. So yesterday or 2 days ago, this thing, again, this happened in April. We're now in June. So this pops up yesterday on, on Gordon Ryan and Michael Sears, friend of the show, friend of yours, friend of mine, friend of the show, So these guys start pumping out this clip of the video. And in the video, Robert Drysdale is talking about, and this is a direct quote from the start of the video. He said, the current situation in jiu-jitsu. Okay, that's the only direct quote I'm going to throw out here. The current situation in jiu-jitsu. So then he starts naming teams, and he names Gracie Barra, Atos, but he calls it like Atos or something fucking weird. Like he's the only one in the world who probably fucking pronounces it like that. But whatever, Robert Drysdale, you'll kill me, so just whatever. Checkmat and Alliance maybe? And then he specifically goes on to like denounce the Danaher guys, but it was fucking arrogant, man. Like can we put a clip in of it?
If I can put a clip in, I will. If you're not hearing a clip right now, it means that I think it's not going to fly for fair use and we'll get flagged. So
it's maybe. Fucking arrogant how he says this. He says like he pretends he's like searching. He's like, and the Danaher, like it was just fucking arrogant. It came off arrogant, and he starts talking about how those guys, that team, isn't on the same level as the other teams, and that they're only where they are essentially because they're driven by the media. They're popular. The shitstorm that set off on social media was unbelievable. And again, I don't know why it took 2 months for this to happen, because I was looking again today and the article was published in April with that video. So Gordon Ryan, who hasn't been on social media in a few weeks, comes out of the woodwork and just starts laying into him. Mo Jassim, who's the ADCC organizer, comes out and starts going in on him. Michael Sears starts going in on him, and then all these other people on social media go ballistic. And as is the case with essentially any topic that Gordon Ryan touches, there's no middle ground, right? So you have like 1,000 people on one side of it and 1,000 people on the other side. Like there's no common ground here. So people were ready to kill Drysdale, and then people were just going against Gordon Ryan to go against Gordon Ryan.
They had their pitchforks ready.
Right. So here is where we're at now. During the argument, during this whole thing, Gordon Ryan puts out 3 separate posts, and it essentially shows, and he seems to have proof, that Drysdale and Andre Galvao, who were both members of Team Braza at that time, kind of colluded to fix that match in the semifinals of the Absolute at ADCC so that Drysdale could face Marcelo Garcia fresh.
Gordon said on Instagram, "Why do you keep openly admitting your fight at ADCC was fake?" And Galvao responded to that comment and said, quote, "Because it was. I fought a teammate. As I said, I got penalized by ADCC. Even after getting double gold, they made me go back to the trials in 2009. Guess what? I went back to the trials. I fought it and I won 7 fights. No easy path for me, only for you. end quote. And that last little part didn't really matter too much because it's just shit talking back and forth. But that is Galvao saying the answer to the question, why did you admit your fight was fake? Because it was. Okay, the fight was fake. That's confirmation from the one half of the two guys who fixed the fight that the fight was fixed.
It's a scumbag fucking move if it indeed happened under just normal circumstances. The kicker here is that Marcelo Garcia was attempting to go 8 for 8.
So Mo Jassem chimed in. Did you see Mo Jassem's comment?
Right. Yeah.
Mo Jassem, who, if you don't know who Mo Jassem is, he's the man who runs ADCC. Now, it also should be said, for full disclosure, Mo Jassem is closely affiliated is the wrong word to use in a jiu-jitsu
He's got close
context.
personal relationships with the Danaher guys. They live in Puerto
Correct.
Rico together. But
Correct.
Mo's not a fucking lie. Mo ain't lying here, you know?
No. I'm firmly believing in what Mo is saying. I just want to point it out there. So again, to save people from commenting on the YouTube video, yes, I know that maybe pinch of salt or whatever, but no salt here. Mo said, quote, I normally don't chime in on these things, but Marcelo had 7 subs going into 2007 finals. He could have had 8 subs double gold, but Drysdale participated in a fixed match and screwed MG, Marcelo Garcia, out of history. That is 100% fact. So Drysdale is literally the last person in BJJ I am ever going to listen to about respect and humility. Everyone in the sport should practice what they preach. It's not that fucking hard. End quote. So that's Mo Jassem, who runs ADCC now, confirming that the fight was fixed.
There's only been one person to win ADCC with 100% sub rate, and it was Hodger Gracie way back when. All right, so he won double gold, 100% sub rate. And Marcelo wins his weight class, 100% sub rate, and then he goes in, and I think that was the year that he fought Rico Rodriguez in the open weight. Right, and he subbed him, so he was 7 for 7 with 100% sub rate. And those scumbags, if again allegedly, so I should.
You have to say allegedly. I learned a lot doing the Lloyd Irvin video, which is still available on our Patreon if you want to check that out. The link is below. If you say allegedly a lot, you sort of avoid. I'm not making allegations against you. I'm repeating allegations that have been already said. So allegedly.
Okay, so let me say this. And those guys, Galvao and Drysdale, allegedly colluded to put a fresh body in there against him after the finals, after he ran the gauntlet in his weight class and the open division. So he had 3 fights in the open division, subbed everybody, and then they wanted to put a fresh body in there. Andre Galvao is one of the best jiu-jitsu practitioners and best jiu-jitsu competitors in the history of the sport. If you go back and watch this fight, I watched it yesterday and I watched it again today. I've seen it before. It is a fucking travesty. It's a joke, and there's nothing about this match to anyone who understands jiu-jitsu and understands who Andre Galvao is and who Robert Drysdale is. That would tell you that this was an authentic match.
I've never thought like, oh, that seemed fishy. I was just like, oh, that was an unusual turn of events for that match. But now if you look back in hindsight with the lens of this was a fixed fight, it's sort of like, why did I not think that all along? And I know there were people in 2007 who were like, fake fight, it's fixed. But it didn't really have a lot of like traction. Like it wasn't a big thing. But now going back and watching that match again, it's like, oh, okay, yeah. That I see it.
All right, so we threw some of our opinions in there, and they're strong opinions, but I haven't even touched on the latest piece of evidence that's probably the most damning piece of evidence of it all, and that's Damian Maia now coming out and saying that he knew that it was a fixed fight. He knew that Galvao was going to throw the fight because they were on the same team. And Drysdale and Andre Galvao had a deal that they were going to split the money that Drysdale won from the Absolute. If he beat Marcelo Garcia, they were going to split the money because Galvao was, through the fight. And Damian Maia said that's what happened.
And again, like we're talking about this, so you might think like, what's the big deal? Teammates, it's just a tournament. There's money involved. Like there's a cash prize for winning. It's financial. It's a financial benefit to send in the fresh guy against Marcelo. So it's not just like, oh, these two guys at even like an IBJJF tournament decided to, like, two guys close out the division by doing rock, paper, scissors. It's not that. There's money involved. And when you see people closing out a division that way, like a coin flip or a rock, paper, scissors, that's the last match.
Right.
Throwing this fight meant that a fresh guy was going to have another match in the finals. So it's a very different situation.
Yeah, and the other thing too is we're not talking about a fucking Naga tournament. This isn't a Naga tournament in, Philly. This is the biggest event in grappling, right? The most prestigious event in no-gi grappling and arguably in grappling in general. Back then they were doing it every year, but since then, it's every 2 years. People have often referred to ADCC as the Olympics of grappling. There's only 16 people in the world at each weight class that get to go to this. It's not like anyone can register. So there's a lot of prestige surrounding this. And to do that, if that happened, is just two guys taking a shit on that tournament and on the sport.
I mean, it's not hyperbolic to say the Super Bowl was fixed, or I guess a better analogy would be the NFC Championship game was fixed so that one team could go to the Super Bowl. Like, that would be a big problem for the NFL if it came out that was what happened. And yeah, this was 2007, a bunch of years ago, but this is still people who are active in this community. It's not like two guys you've never heard of since then who've long since retired. Like, these are two active participants in this community, basically admitting at this point that they fixed a fight in, like Mike said.
Well, Drysdale won't admit it. Drysdale won't admit it, and he said that it's convenient that Andre Galvao is saying that it was fixed because he was the one that lost. Now, regardless, if you've noticed lately in a lot of these tournaments, they will, in IBJJF, they'll put teammates on opposite sides of the bracket, and then they'll get to the finals and they'll close out. Some teammates won't, like those savages from Pedigo. They never close out, which I think is awesome. Oh, and also Drysdale. I was looking for this, but Michael Sears, who friend of the show, friend of yours, friend of mine, Michael Sears. Anyway, Michael Sears put on there yesterday that Robert Drysdale was talking some shit on the Daisy Fresh crew. Like, what do you, Robert?
Yeah.
Robert, let's be careful what we're doing here.
Yeah.
You don't want the smoke that's coming out of that fucking laundromat, buddy. So they'll put people on the opposite sides of the bracket, which is like, do you want people closing it out in the finals? But so ADCC last year in the absolute and in certain divisions, they would put teammates on the same side of the bracket to stop so they couldn't close it out. And I was like, oh, I get that now. But now after seeing this, it's like, which is worse?
Right.
Which would you rather? Would you rather have guys fighting until the end and getting to the finals and legitimately being in the finals and, deciding to close it out? Or would you rather have guys with the potential, and this didn't happen last year, but would you rather have the potential for guys to sandbag it in the semis and throw a fresh guy into the finals?
I don't know. I'd like to assume that nobody would throw fights.
Be a scumbag.
If you put people on the same side of the bracket.
Say be a scumbag.
Yeah. People wouldn't be scumbags to throw fights.
There you go.
So this is not the first time on this show that we've had conversation about Andre Galvao and some shady behavior, and I'll link to it up here, but Andrew Wiltsey told us all about his opinions of Andre Galvao and some of the alleged bad behavior on Galvao's part. And again, links up here. Check that interview out. Someone who wants to defend Drysdale could say, he didn't do anything wrong. Gordon and Mo Jassim are, buddies. So that's what's happening. And Galvao was just being sarcastic or whatever. But what's it called for like legal stuff where you have like a character witness, or we talk about like a person's previous behavior that may impact the jury's
Yeah,
opinion
well, I
of
mean, like, so I guess it would be a
prior
character.
bad actions.
Yeah, I don't know, just character defects.
Well,
In court, like they would have like this thing called like crimin fallacies. So it'd be like they have to tell the court about like any crimes of deception that they've had.
if you look just in the history of Mr. Drysdale, there have been some instances where maybe the idea that he would lie about bad actions, like when he was in the UFC and he failed an out of competition drug test, and he said that he was taking TRT and he thought that he had an exemption, but there was a problem with the paperwork, so he didn't actually have that exemption. So after that suspension, he comes back to the UFC, wins a fight, and then fails the post-fight drug test for an elevated testosterone. That was the TE ratio was more than double the legal amount. So he said one thing, and then like, because he had said after that first test or that first failure when he got suspended and said that it was a paperwork error, he said publicly that he wasn't on testosterone anymore, and then failed the test for testosterone. So that's not the best, I guess. I mean, not you'd hate to use one instance in a
Right.
guy's life to denigrate him, but
Drysdale has roots in the Brazilian culture. He also has roots in the American culture. I think that he hates what these Danaher guys stand for. They're young, they're outspoken, they're kind of reinventing the game, and they're just dominating. And he's going to argue that there's only so many of them as opposed to these huge teams. My personal opinion is that I think it's more impressive when you have these smaller gyms or these smaller teams that are going to these competitions and nabbing spots on the podium, because they're not pulling from 400 or 500 guys. So I think that Drysdale's always been biased towards these guys. To say that Danaher and Gordon Ryan, like that whole squad, Danaher, Gordon Ryan, Gary Tonin, Nicky Ryan, Krendelstein, all those guys, Nicky Rod, that they're not on the level of these other gyms is bonkers. Now, Drysdale tried to, I don't even know, like, go back on what he said, and then he was saying that he meant the gi because these guys compete in the gi too, not the Danaher guys, but the other gyms that he mentioned compete in the gi. But it was just a bad look. It's crazy not to give credit where it's due.
I agree, and like I don't know, maybe it's just you don't like those guys, so you're trying to pretend like they're not as good as they are
That's
because
I
you
mean
just don't
that's
like
exactly
them.
what
But
it is. He should take pride in it too. He should take pride in it, because I think that Drysdale did have something to do with advancing jiu-jitsu in America. But he's being fucking bitter.
Drysdale for sure. I mean, second American ever behind BJ Penn to win a black belt world championship. Like, that's incredible. And he's been a coach for a long time. He's put out instructionals for a long time, even though he put out that one instructional that he admitted on Reddit was just a cash grab and he didn't really work too hard on it.
Yeah.
He also was in the news not that long ago, maybe a year ago, where he was the one who was in the corner that was getting a bunch of heat for I think it was the Max Rockshop fight where
Yeah.
Max in between rounds was basically saying, I have nothing left, and clearly wanted out of the fight. And it was Robert Drysdale who basically was trying to force someone to fight against their will. And luckily, the fight was still called off before the third round started, but got a lot of heat for the way he was in the corner trying to get someone who had no business going back out for a fight, for the third round of a fight, to go back out and just continue to get demolished. And I'm not saying any of these things are connected to the other. Being bad in the corner at one UFC event doesn't mean you for sure fixed a fight at ADCC in 2007.
No.
It just
No.
paints a bigger picture of the type of person that we're talking about.
It does, and he worked. So I first I first knew who he was, he kind of came into the public eye, into more of a mainstream aspect when he was Frank Mir's jiu-jitsu coach.
Right.
And don't put it past Gordon Ryan to devote days of his life to burning this fucking guy to the ground, you know? And now that Michael Sears and Mo Jassim are on, they were talking today about taking steps to strip him of the fucking 2007 Absolute title. I don't know if they can do that, but it's something that should be looked into, right? Like if...
Right. Going forward, whether it's in the finals or it's in the semis or they're on the same side of the bracket, two teammates compete. For at least a little bit now, we're all going to say, is this another Drysdale Galvao, or are these two guys really going at it?
It's hard, very hard to argue that this didn't happen exactly the way that they're saying it. And not that I thought that it didn't happen, but the Damian Maia thing, who's kind of removed from this, coming in and saying, yeah, they split the prize money. I'm like, okay, well, there it is.
What was your opinion of Robert Drysdale before this, and what is your opinion now, and how has it changed?
Robert Drysdale's a legend, and I think that this controversy tarnishes that.
Yeah, I'm in the same camp where, again, like, I am capable of nuance. You are capable of nuance. I think the perspective of our collective show is capable of nuance, but a lot of people aren't. And a lot of people are fuck Drysdale or I love Drysdale. Fuck Galvao or I love Galvao. I can look at it and say both of those guys have fantastic jiu-jitsu and are some of the best to ever compete. I think it's really shitty what they did, but Drysdale remains a pioneer for Americans competing in jiu-jitsu.
Right.
I won't buy any of his instructionals, but I already wouldn't have done that because he's already admitted, as I previously alluded, that he just puts them out for money and he's probably not putting a lot of thought behind them. So it doesn't affect my life that much, in the sense that I will still continue to operate under the assumption that every jiu-jitsu match I watch is above board and not fixed until I'm shown evidence otherwise. It's a bummer. It bums me out to think that the guy who was the second American ever to win a world championship did something like this. Galvao, I have already known that Galvao is probably not the best dude in the world, allegedly, but it sucks. It's a bummer. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't fix a fight, especially against you, because I don't need to fix the fight. If you ever see a tournament where Mike and I are going at it and Mike beats me, maybe you should, alarm bell is, it might have been.
Yeah, if I ever decided to enter the teenage middleweight division.
My closing thought would be, let's all just continue to move forward as if jiu-jitsu is still the best sport in the world, because it is, and let's not let the shitty behavior of two allegedly shitty people 14, 15 years ago change that. And by Gordon and those guys attacking him, which I think was the right reaction, they continue to attack him. And I know we're guilty of this too, because we're doing a show about it, giving attention to Drysdale that he probably wants, because he's probably going to announce in a week that his documentary is going to finally be released when his name is in the news. So we're guilty of it too as members of this media, but fuck those guys. Move on with our lives.
All right, guys. Thanks for hanging out with us.
We hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up.
And also make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We have a ton of content coming out over the next couple weeks that you definitely don't want to miss.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you in the next video.
Thanks, guys.